Okay, so it's hour 3 of our third lesson of Intro to Web Programming. So we've built our table. We've built 2 pages now that query the database. The first one just displays artist names, and our second page creates an HTML table. And we've even added some formatting around our links so that our links are actually active, usable URLs. We're going to write another page where we're querying our artist table. We want to fetch the list of data, but instead of showing all the columns, the name, the year, and the website, we just want the name, and we want it to look something like this. So, for example, let's say I want to copy this folder to another one of my courses. I get this. So in the middle of the screen, I've got this list. So where do you suppose the values in this list come from? Zach? Yeah, they come from a database. So if Jarrett or Tom were to go in and copy a folder in Blackboard, and they were to click this drop down, would they see the same values here as we're looking at now, or would they see different values? Right, they would see the courses that they're connected to. So this drop-down queries the course table in the Blackboard database, but there's also a filter on it, right? I only see the data that's relevant to me. And much like I said earlier, every website you ever build is going to have at least one HTML table of data. It's probably also going to have at least one drop-down list where we're filling the options from some kind of database query. So we want to look at how do we do this instead. A lot of the process is the same. We connect to the database, we run a query, we store the results, we loop through and display the results. But the HTML packaging or the wrapping, we're not, instead of using tables and TRTD, we're going to need to use a different set of HTML tags. So instead of rendering our data like this, we want to render it in a similar format to this. We want to simply print the artist names in a drop-down list, and the user can choose one. So let's make a new file. We'll make a new PHP file. I'll call it artist dropdown.php. So the first thing we're going to want to put on here, if we're going to use a drop-down list, the drop-down list is a type of form input control, so we need a form tag. What method do we want to use? We always want to use post because we said it's more secure. We're going to set an action. So our form is going to post to a page called Artist Details. And we'll put on a label. And then what HTML tag do we use that will create a drop-down list? So if we go back, I go back to Blackboard, if I inspect this element, what HTML tag will it show? So if I inspect it, yep, we have an HTML select tag. So we'll create So we get opening and closing tags. And then I'll put on a button that says view details. If I want to check this out in my browser, I'll open up the drop-down page. Here's what we get. We get a label that says select artist. We have a view details button, and I have an empty drop-down list. There's nothing in it. So inside the drop-down list, we need most of the code from our other pages. We need to connect to the database. We need to run a query and store the results. And then we need to loop through the results and put each artist name into our list so the user can pick one. So all of that PHP code I can actually put in line 13. It can go inside my opening and closing select tags. So we're going to connect, write, and run query to get the artist names. We'll loop through each record and add each name to the drop-down. What kind of HTML tags will we need inside the drop-down around each name? We'll go back to Blackboard and inspect again. I'll put the code back up, don't panic. So here's my select and end select tags. If I expand this, I know it's hard to see. What tags do we have inside around each item, each menu item? Right, we've got an opening and closing option tag. So in our table, we've used TR and TDs around the values. This time we want to use open and close option tags. And that'll put those names inside our drop-down list. So a good chunk of this code is exactly the same from our previous page. The only thing that's different is we're not using any table tags. We're using option tags instead. So our connection is going to be the same. It's important there are no spaces in this part of your connection string. Mitchell, did that fix the issue when you took the spaces out? So put in your credentials again. What query should we execute to get the data we want to put in the dropdown? Yep. Okay, yep, that's the first word. That's good. It's a good start. Okay. Now we better check what's our column called. Is it called names or names singular? Right. So if we put in names, we're going to get an error because there's no call. We're going to get an undefined index. There's no column called names from artists. Now in our list, we selected star. That would work here. I think this query, sorry, remind your name again? Brian's query, I think, is better. Why in this case should we just select the name column rather than selecting star? Right. Our drop-down list can only show one value, so there's no need to query for more data than we need. If we select all the data, our query is going to run more slowly than it has to. So we should only select the columns that we're using. And then we'll set up our command object. And we'll execute the query. And lastly, we can store the results. So we'll call fetch all. So this code is almost identical to the previous page. We've just simplified our query a little bit. We're only asking for the artist names. We're not asking for the year or the website. I'll go down to the bottom and just set my connection to null. So now we've got a list of artist names. We're already inside our dropdown. We've started the dropdown up here. So this code is happening inside it. So how do we print each artist name into the drop-down list? What's the first thing we need on line 25? Thank you. We need an echo. And what tags do we need around each value in the comment? We're going to print a new option tag. And then how do we print the artist name inside the option? How would we access those values? So, right, we're going to use our value. And what would go in here? Right, we want to print out the artist name column. And then close our option. So this should populate our list. So all of this code is the same. The only thing that's different is we're using option tags instead of TRs and TDs. Let's try it. Cool. Whoever is connected to my database, do not. If you're using my credential, please remove it from your code, connect to your own database. The only data that should be in my database is the data I put into it. If you can't connect to your AWS database, you can use the shared Loosefoot database from last week. What will happen if I click the View Details button now? This is the expected behavior because it's loading artist details. We don't have that page. So right now, if we get a 404 error, we're posting to artist details, but that page doesn't yet exist. So this is expected. So again, same process, connect to the database, run a query, store the results, loop through the results, and display them with whatever HTML formatting we want to use. So we're going to build one more page today, which is we want to build the artist details page. The name is going to get sent to that page, and then we want to use that artist name to go to the database and display all of the information about the artist. But just this one artist. We don't want to display all the data for all the records, only the one the user chooses in the dropdown. So this page is basically complete. Anybody have questions about what we're doing here? All right, so we need to make a page with this name, artist-details.php. So make one new file. So make sure the file name matches the attribute action of your form. This will get that 404 error to go away. So if I save this and refresh, now I get a blank page because we've created this file. So let's lay out all the things we need to do here. So the user is choosing on the previous page, they're choosing an artist in our dropdown. So we want to know which artist did they click on in the dropdown list. We'll connect to the database. So here's our process. It's largely the same. We're not going to need a loop in this case because we're only selecting one record. So instead of using fetch all, we're going to use a different form of the fetch command because we're only getting one record. We're not getting a list. So we don't need fetch all and we don't need a loop. Maybe up here, I'll just print a heading. Just details. So what would we need to do here? What would be an appropriate variable? And how do we get the user selection from the dropdown? Remember, here's our dropdown. So we want to read or interpret the value of what the user picked when they're here. So what should we call our variable, first of all? We could call it artist name, or if we want to match the actual column name, we just call it name. So how do we read the value from the drop-down list? So in our form, our drop-down list is called name. So we can read the value with $$underscore post name. So this variable will now hold whatever artist name the user chose. If this is starting to become cumbersome and a bit familiar, good, that's the idea. Type it enough times so that you start to become familiar with how to do it. One of these days, I'll even learn my password. So what does our query look like? So we have the artist name, and we want to look up the rest of the details for this one artist. What query would you need to run? Yeah, we would, but that's correct, but what should come after the word select then in order to do that? Okay, so select star. Okay, now there's two ways we can do this: the quick and dirty and dangerous way, or the right way. The dangerous way is just insert the artist name here. The problem is the artist name might contain a special character or an SQL command. So you can do it the quick and dirty way. I don't recommend it. I'm going to set up a parameter for that name instead. So again, we'll prepare a command. So in our last file, we called prepare, and then on the very next line, we called execute on both of our last two files. Called prepare and then execute. We need to do something else first. We can't execute the query yet. Why not? We need one more step before we run the query. Right, we have to populate this variable safely. Unless we want to live on the edge like Zach, we're going to safely populate our name parameter from our name variable, and then we'll execute the query. So we'll call bind param. We'll fill our name parameter with our name variable. And then we'll execute the query. So we didn't use bind param before because we didn't pass any values into our other SQL queries. There was no where clause. We were just getting everything with no filter. But because we want to pass the value in, we need this parameter to pass it in safely. And in this case, we don't need fetch all. We can just use the fetch method instead. So we can use fetch for a single record instead of fetch all for a list of records. So I just have a single array called artist. So now I can just print out and disconnect. And if this works, we can then add an anchor tag around the website. So again, that's a live link rather than just static HTML. Our process is similar. Connect, write a query, run the query, but in this case, we've got to use a parameter to safely pass in the selected artist name. So the last thing I'll do is add this anchor tag around the website. With a very confusing syntax. So here it's double quote, single quote, and then single quote, double quote. So I'll reload it and make sure my links work. So there's all our code. So we've written 4 different pages that query our artist table today. The code is fairly repetitive because the process really doesn't change very much. The only things that change in the query is whether or not we're passing in any parameters to the query. And if we are, we need to use that bind param method for safety. The other thing that changes is what HTML wrapping we're using to present the data. We've used a grid, we've used the dropdown. Here we've just used line breaks and anchor tags. So most of our PHP pages are going to look like the ones we've done today. It's a combination of PHP code that fetches certain data from the database, and we're combining it with HTML formatting to create dynamic pages. Okay, I will just take my password out of all the files. Leo, I'm going to follow your suggestion. So I'm going to take my password out of everything. Okay, so just give me a second. I need to just update the lab instructions because you guys do have a lab. So your lab is due, I think it should be on Tuesday, but if not, I'll double check and make sure that's the right date. I'm just going to upload the instructions and I will go over it. Okay, here's what you need to do. In your AWS database, run this create and insert script. Okay, just copy it, paste it, execute it. It will build a table. It will insert 16 records into the table. You're then going to build a file called lab1.php. This file will connect to your AWS database, select all the team information, and display it in an HTML table of rows and columns. You'll then upload your Lab1 page to FileZilla and make sure that you can load it on the AWS web server. To submit the lab, you need to create a new repository on GitHub. That repository should be marked as private. You then have to go into the settings and add me as a collaborator. There's my GitHub username. So you click add collaborator, there's a text box, you put in my GitHub username, you'll see my little avatar pop up, and GitHub will email me a link to the repository. To submit on D2L, I want 2 links, please. Submit the link to your repository and submit the link to your page running on AWS. So to mark your lab, I'm going to click on your repository, review the code, click on the link to AWS, make sure your page loads in the browser. Okay. It is due tomorrow, it is due, should be Tuesday at 5 o'clock. No, Tuesday. It's lots of time. This shouldn't take longer than about 10 minutes to do. One caution, Tuesday. So the file you're creating is largely based on our artist list. It's pretty much the same thing, except you're connecting to a different table and you're outputting different column headings and different values. My code is up here on GitHub as a reference for you. If you download the file, do find and replace from the word artist to teams and give me back my own file, I'm not marking it. I'm not marking my own work that you did find on replace for, okay? I've coded long enough to know my own work when I see it. I know my coding style, I know where I tab and indent, I know my own comments. So do not change the words and give them back to me, okay? This is an easy 2.5%, but the only way you're gonna learn is if you try and write the code yourself, encounter errors and work through and fix them. Taking my code, changing it, giving it back to me is not gonna help you learn how to do this. So this file is here for a reference only. If your file looks like my file, I'm not gonna give you grades for it. Fair enough? Okay, it's a small lab, 2.5 marks, like I said, it shouldn't take you long. If you have this page working for today, use it as a guide. If yours isn't working, use my code from GitHub as a guide. The lesson is on YouTube as well. It's right here. The link is on D2L and it's right here in the instruction. Does anybody have any questions about the lab? Okay, if not, have a good weekend. Before class next week, have a look at what we did this week because there'll be some quiz questions on selecting and displaying data.